Howdy guys, it's your old buddy Cam from Principles of Performance, and I thought I'd try something a little different today. So I've always wanted to get a podcast off the ground, but I feel like there might be a little bit more interactivity and connectivity with video. So I figured I'd kick off one of my first with my good buddy James from Sydney, who's studying physiotherapy, and we're just going to dive straight in to the topic that we are going to be discussing. James, say hi and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of info about you, man.
All right. Hello, everyone. So as Cam said, I'm James, studying physio up here at the University of Sydney, currently in my last year of the master's degree. Been working prior to that in strength and conditioning for probably about 8 years now, I think. So I worked at various places. I think we first met at our first little entry into the world of strength and conditioning, Cam.
At Woodford Sports Science back in the day.
Yeah.
Shout out to Christian. Thanks very much, man, for creating a great platform for us to launch from.
Exactly right. So we, that would have been a while back now, probably a good 6 or 7 years, I think.
We'd be going on 6 years for sure. Holy shit.
So that's where, I'd started a little bit before then and then saw this internship and I was like, great. And then I met Cam and I was like, even better. Let's do this.
Even greater. Very humbling. Thank you.
So then I floated around a bit doing S&C, went over to America, interned over there for a while, and then came back to Australia, spent a bit of time with the West Tigers as well before coronavirus hit us this year. And now I'm just pretty much solely hoping that we can finish this degree on time. And if not, well, it is what it is and we'll get it done eventually.
Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice?
But it's all on track at the moment, surprisingly. But
that's good.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing online study at the moment, or are you still doing practical stuff?
I'm still doing placement. So I'm currently at Bankstown Sports Physio.
Okay.
Or sports and injury physiotherapy. I can't actually remember what the name of it is.
Gotcha. How's that going?
It's good. I'm doing a lot of work with hands at the moment, actually, which is really good, amongst a lot of just general neck, back, hip, shoulder,
whole body.
Yeah.
Knee, foot, big toe,
little
spine.
Bit. But a good probably 50 to 60% of what we're doing is hands at the moment, which is cool. Quite interesting because I haven't actually specialized in hands for anything before. So I've learned quite a bit so far. So I'm enjoying that.
Are they a specialist hand sports physiotherapist, or is it just that's the run of the mill at the moment?
So my clinical educator and the fella who runs the center, he's a hand therapist.
Okay.
And my clinical educator, she isn't a hand therapist, but she specializes in hand physiotherapy.
Yep, cool.
So we get a lot of referrals from like surgeons that have had to repair, tendon, nerve, like lacerations and all that kind of stuff. People have chopped their fingers off. Like
nice.
One person trying to get the avocado seed out, missed the seed and going straight through their hand. So
that'll do it.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, just like a lot of surgeon referrals and just general people who've had injuries, like say in combat, like whether they're police, fireys or whatever, if they've injured their hands at work, we'll get them coming through as well.
Very cool, man. Very cool. What's something that you've learned, the most significant thing you've learned from this placement?
Significant thing I've learned.
Under the bus on this one.
Yeah, I think it's probably not so much from like a diagnostic and treatment standpoint, but just working with a different cultural background. So I'm used to working with just a lot of like Caucasian people, being from Geelong. That's probably what our biggest populace is down there. Whereas up here, currently over in Bankstown, we have a lot of people who are like from like Lebanon and all those countries over that direction. And so, they've got a lot of different cultural beliefs and religious beliefs that I sort of have to take into account when I'm trying to convey my message to them as to whether it's something I want them to do at home or what I'm going to do for them in treatment at that session, and make it applicable to them. And so Yeah, I think the biggest thing is trying to understand your patient more so than anything, because if you know what you want to do to treat them, but if you can't convey your message to their specific needs, then it's not really going to be useful.
Yeah, very good point, man. Like the hand doesn't change from person to person, but the
No,
person changes from person to person, and you got to treat the person, not the hand.
exactly. Yeah. So
Very
that
cool. Very cool.
exactly that hand will be the same hand, but what's attached to that hand is going to be different.
Mm. Well, I
You know.
mean, the forearm's attached to the hand, like
Well, the
unless there's no hand.
the network
Shit.
of neurons.
Love it, man. That's sick. I'm really happy that you're kicking goals. You're like, I'm a big fan of yours, and as we said before, we met like 6-7 years ago, and ever since then we've just like I feel like we've gone parallel in our pursuit for professional and personal development. Like we're always like doing the same thing, just in different ways, which is friggin' awesome. But we
Yeah.
can go for like months at a time without chatting and then touch base. And it feels like we're still in sync. Like we're talking about the same things, just in different ways. And it helps bridge the gap of like the same problem, which, is hand, for example, but then, we come at it from different perspectives, which creates a really broad context that we both get better from. And that's one of the things that I've especially loved about, having a personal and professional sort of relationship with you over the last, better part of a decade, is that your pursuit for knowledge and for that like application of knowledge and the context behind it is very, very inspiring to watch, man. And it definitely keeps me hungry to learning more, which is why I'm excited to sort of kick this off with you, because I feel like this is where it really began for me, was with you at Woody's, and here we are 6-7 years later, and it's still here. Like, you came down 3 months ago, and we sat in the garage for 2 hours and ate kebabs and talked about
Yeah.
like,
All
pain
sorts of stuff.
referral and yeah, and it was
Like
rad.
just
And
movement and like why people move the way they do. It was incredible. But I
yeah,
appreciate those words a lot. It means a lot. Thank you.
now it's your turn to say something really nice about me. Go. I'll pretend to be
Likewise.
humble. Oh, thanks, man. Really nice. Now
No,
let's
but
get into the
honestly,
topic. Oh, go on.
okay. I was gonna say honestly, like whenever I'm actually like quite inspired by the work you do too, because I'm honestly when I'm sitting here and I'm like, why does this work for this reason and blah blah blah. I'm always thinking like, Cam is always thinking this way, and I respect the way he thinks. So like, it's almost like a what would Cam think kind of situation when I'm trying to dive really deep into something.
Oof. Yeah, I was going to say that is a deep dive, man. Like my
Uh,
brain goes to
yeah.
crazy places.
But like I do think about it a lot. I'm like, wow, I look up to this guy, the way he goes about it. So
Thank you,
I
man. I
appreciate you for
appreciate that
that.
as well. Yeah, that's dope. If there is one thing I hope that I can impart on coaches, junior or senior, is like, I don't want to come in and have left this industry changing the way people train or changing the way people treat and assess. I want to change the way people think. And if that makes it like more of a broad thought process rather than just a laser focused process, great. Like if I make you second guess something, even if you're right, if I make you second guess it, I want you to do that so that the time when you're wrong, you catch it, rather than just trying to get that, one size fits all approach. And that's been my biggest strength as a coach, as an educator, not only for clients, but for coaches and clinicians, is to make them second guess themselves and to challenge their thought processes and their systems, just so that they know that they're giving the best level of care to the person in front of them, rather than a shotgun approach to 10 people and it's only applying to 9. Because I'd hate for that 1 out of 10 person to be my mum, and then for my mum to come to me and say, hey, I saw these therapists and these coaches and they couldn't fix my problem. And I'm sitting here going, hey, this problem isn't actually a big problem. It's just that they haven't stopped to look at the problem. They've just, they've expected before they've assessed. So that's I hope to be my legacy. And that's kind of what I want this platform to be here, where I have these conversations with people and it changes the way people think. I think that'd be really cool
100%.
in
I
a
think it's
huge way.
important.
For
important.
sure, for sure, for sure. You know, it's one of my bugbears with the tertiary education system where you don't get to sit down and have these big brain dumps and brainstorm sessions. There's a great program in Ballarat at Ballarat University run by Scott Talpy, who I've heard firsthand from students. They sit down as a group and they problem solve case studies. And it's not just a case study where it's written on a piece of paper and it's like, what's the answer? It's, this is a real person. What can we do in order to progress this person who is either an athlete or non-athlete? Like, this is a master's of strength and conditioning. So I expect you to be able to use the knowledge you've applied from exercise sports science. Let's get it. Like, let's do it. I think that's cool. So,
That's
you know, we need more of that, even at lower levels of tertiary, where we're, you know, in our first year of a bachelor's of exercise and sports science, like, let's start breaking out more about the anatomy rather than here's the biceps long head and it flexes the elbow. And like, well, it also flips the hand. And when it hasn't flipped the hand, what's it doing at the shoulder? Like, let's ask those questions, because
100%.
when you come out the other end of that exercise sports science degree, I need you to be able to understand why I might be prescribing someone an overhand chin up for shoulder rehab rather than an underhand chin up, even though we know we get more activation. Like, I need you to be able to rationalize those things. So that's what I want to get out of, you know. Anyway, enough about me. I want to talk about you because we have a really cool topic that we're going to touch on, which is your prep for your half-ironman, which unfortunately you can't do, but there's still really cool, unless that's changed and you can do it now.
Well, I could do it on my own, but I probably won't be.
Pussy.
No.
I know you've trained really hard for it though, so I'm devastated that you can't. But you know, we had a conversation recently about a lot of the stuff that you were learning from that experience, and I'd love to dive into that because it's not your typical cookie cutter. Oh, you know, I got stronger and I got fitter. There are a lot of deeper things that I'd love to dive into over the next sort of 45 minutes, where we talk about some of the aerobic training that you did and the difference or the different approaches to the aerobic training and the physiological and psychological approaches to that. And I also know that, you were eating like a friggin' linebacker and, not putting on a whole bunch of weight and even like leaning out through the face. And a lot of those increases in your intake were from carbohydrates, which is another deep dive into potential like nutrition and the underpinning foundations of or the energy system requirements of that level of training and that volume of training. So yeah, I'd love to just have you kick it off with, just tell us, one, why a half Ironman? Because I know you and I would love to know why a half Ironman and why not like a powerlifting comp. And two, like some of your philosophies and principles around your approach to training for that half Ironman, because I know you programmed for yourself and I've seen some of it and it was pretty hectic.
All right. So first of all, why a half Ironman? So I remember when we first got into the lockdown with coronavirus, and I went back to Geelong because I was studying uni online up in Sydney. My job got cancelled, uni got cancelled, the gyms all closed. So I was sort of just sitting in my room twiddling my thumbs, and went back to Geelong just to live with my folks for a little while and do uni online. And one of my mates up here in Sydney calls me up and he goes, "Oh, do you want to train for this half Ironman? We haven't got much to do right now. Let's do it." And I was just like, "Oh, no, I don't want to do that, man. Why would I want to do that? That's dumb." And he just said to me, he's like, "Yeah, come on, man. Like, it'll be your first one. You won't do that well, but it'll be a great learning curve for you." And like at that moment where he just goes, "Oh, you won't do that well," I was like, "Nah, I'm doing this thing, and I'm probably gonna do well, and I'm gonna do better than you. Like,
Classic
I'm gonna do
Westhorpe.
whatever."
Classic Westhorpe.
Because my mentality is it's just whatever it takes, and like I'm just gonna do whatever it takes for me to actually do well at this thing. And like I don't care if I have to wake up at 3 a.m. and train. I'm gonna do it. So so he said we're gonna do half Ironman, so that's the reason why we went half. But even if he said we're doing a full, I probably would have still done that as well. And then I guess what was the next question? I've forgotten already. Training.
Yeah, your principles and your approach to
Yeah.
the program that you created for yourself, because it's pretty broad, but there's also strong elements of specificity that I really liked about it. So yeah, I just love for your philosophy and
Yeah.
principles around that.
Yeah. So the main one was, so I was essentially almost untrained going into starting for this thing. Like I enjoy riding my bike, and I have like a very good road bike that I can get around on, which was handy.
Yeah, hit
Um,
pause there because I want to add really quick some context there. When you say untrained, you mean untrained for an Ironman, because
for an
like
Ironman, yeah. I
you're
wasn't,
quite strong, and in terms of
yeah,
resistance training and aerobic and anaerobic training, you've got quite a strong like foundation for that. But
yeah,
the
yeah,
the Ironman training you were quite unprepared
yeah.
for.
So that specificity of actually being prepared for an Ironman, I was not trained for. So I
Yeah.
think for context training wise, beforehand, I was probably doing an hour a week of aerobic work on my bike, just like enjoying a nice ride, down the river.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wasn't running at all, and I hadn't run for probably like 3 or 4 years consistently. And swimming, I'd probably done a little bit of swimming in the 6 months prior, leading up to it, just for a bit of fitness and something we were doing around uni. But that was only once, maybe twice a week for about a 6 month period, and then I had stopped for 4 months leading into this. So yeah, it wasn't a lot that I was doing, and then yeah, I guess my philosophy was built off where I was at, and then where I had to get to actually
Mm-hmm.
just complete it. Um, so in my head, I had some specific times I wanted to hit. So I wanted to hit like a swim first. I had to hit 1.9 Ks. So just so everyone knows, I have to hit a 1.9 K swim, a 90 K bike ride, and then a 21 kilometer run at the end. So my swim, I wanted to hit like, I think it was about 40 minutes.
Yep.
And then I wanted to hit my bike I was aiming for 2.5 hours. And then the run portion, I wanted to get under an hour and 45 minutes, which would have been incredible. So
Yep.
I was like, all right, so this is the total time that I'm going to be competing for. So I'm going to have to build my volume to let me actually be able to like not only complete that, but actually thrive in that environment.
Sure.
So, and then I pretty much just looked at the specificity of the event, and I was like, okay, so this event is pretty much just continuous exercise the whole way through. So I need to actually be good at just sustaining my output for that period of time. But then I had to work out where my output was going to be and how much, energy I was going to require to get there. So in training, I sort of had like little benchmarks that I wanted to hit at certain points, but at the same time, I wasn't married to them because training can ebb and flow.
Yeah.
And
So you just rode those undulations.
yeah, pretty much. Like I auto-regulated it a lot, which is something I haven't really done in my like resistance training. I've always had a plan, and I've stuck to that plan for say like a 8 or 12 or 16 week period. So I knew my sets and reps, 16 weeks in advance. Whereas with this, I took a little bit of a different approach, and I just had an idea of where I wanted to go month to month. But then I wrote each week off the back of the previous week and how I felt I went in regards to that, which I thought actually worked really quite well. And I felt amazing, like for the most part, during it. So, yeah, I don't really have much more to add there, but it was actually like, I didn't actually get the chance to test out where I got to.
Yep.
But I know for sure that, like, I remember my first bike ride when it was about an hour. I think I had to hit an hour and a half bike ride. I got about an hour and 10 minutes into it, and it was a pretty grueling sort of circuit that I was riding on. And I was like, man, I need to actually stop and have a rest here. I'm pretty stuffed. And then I think the longest ride when I came back up to Sydney that my buddy and I did, we went for 3 hours and 15 minutes, and I felt like I could keep going. Like it was,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, incredible.
So was there an element of psychology there in the first instance, or was it more an element of, physiological adaptation in the second instance when you felt you could keep going? Or, same question for both, I guess. Like, was it because you had someone with you that you felt like you could keep going? So there's that psychological element to it. Or do you feel like you may not have been conditioned in that first instance, or perhaps you hadn't recovered from previous instances of training?
I think the first one was just, I didn't have that training volume underneath me to actually sustain the output that I wanted to sustain. Because like looking at the time I did, I wasn't really going that fast on the bike. Yep. And when we did our 3-hour ride, I think we were averaging roughly the same speed as when we did that first hour and 10-minute ride, or hour and 30-minute ride. So, but I also think there was a psychological element playing into it, because it's like, I've got someone here with me, like I don't want to let them down. Sure. And I don't want to be the one dragging my ass. Like, so let's do it. But at the same time, looking through my heart rate data as well, which is something we can talk about a little bit more, because I did most of it based off heart rate metrics.
Yeah, I really want to get into that.
But looking at my heart rate data, a lot of it was still very similar, and my heart rate average across the whole, I guess, long, slow distance training, cycling specifically, was pretty much the same, specifically between those two rides.
Yeah, consistent across the entire sort of training history.
Yeah. And especially when you match up those two rides as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, I mean, you can use that to correlate, I guess, that it might have been, like it might not have been a conditioning thing, because you weren't exactly working harder in that first session than you were in the second session. It's interesting stuff. I like heart rate as a metric, but it opens a lot of, or it asks a lot of questions that if the person that you are providing this information to isn't equipped to answer, they can sit there and say, well, I don't understand why this session felt harder than that one, or vice versa, because I'm working the same amount of intensity. But again, that question can also be answered by introducing elements of auto-regulation, which, for those that don't know, is basing it subjectively on how you feel relative to your maximum effort. So it's rate of perceived exertion based on the session you're in currently and sessions that you've done previously throughout a training block. And it's a very effective way to work, particularly when you're doing high volumes of training that require a lot of time invested into the session, which I think is really cool. Were you using heart rate to measure recovery as well?
I wasn't so much. I was just taking, like I did take my resting heart rate like every few days when I was more so doing it just as an overall health aspect though. I wasn't doing it to measure whether I was ready or not, because the main reason being, because I had to get from essentially an hour of training a week up to like 8 hours of aerobic work plus per week. Like I couldn't afford to just not train if I was tired.
Sure.
So I basically, if I didn't feel right, I would change the intensity of the sessions. So, because long, slow distance training isn't that fatiguing, especially if you're doing, like if you're taking your heart rate into account. Like it's something that you should do to hit the volume necessary that you need, but it's not gonna fatigue you a lot at the same time. So you will finish and feel like, wow, I haven't really done a lot there, but you're actually getting quite a good physiological adaptation from it too. So it's not just I'm going out, spinning my wheels, wasting my time. Like you can be calculated in it and actually have a targeted goal, but at the same time, it's not something that I personally found to be super fatiguing. So like if I'm going for a run and I'm just sitting at a 140 heart rate for, an hour, it's not that hard. You just have to be willing to put the time into it.
Yeah. The 60 minutes of effort, which is, not high. It's consistent, but it's not high effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
That's a video that I recorded today on my laptop. Hopefully the quality comes out good, of me using an example of an assault bike to induce an aerobic stimulus And then the question is, why couldn't you do this at the start of a strength session? It's 18 to 21 minutes of aerobic work, and there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't front load a session or a block with aerobic work, because it's not tiring. It's, if anything, it's priming your system, and it's opening your cells and readying them for the oxygen required to help offset, the fatigue that's going to come in the session. So if you're doing aerobic work, it should feel cruisy. It shouldn't feel easy because you're not doing nothing, but it should feel cruisy because you're trying to gently nudge the aerobic system, which works best when you're not working hard, works best when you're just ticking the boxes, spinning the legs over. So that's it's a really cool thing that you've, that you've learned for yourself, and you've learned it from auto-regulating your training rather than setting stringent goals and trying to stick to them as hard as you can. Because that can play an effect mentally, I guess, on people when they undershoot a session that they were expecting to perform well in, and they don't take into account the last 5 or 10 or 20 days worth of training that they've been ticking a lot of boxes, and that one session they undershoot, they can kind of, that can make or break a training cycle. So that's an important one for not just coaches, but for athletes as well. Anyone that watches this, like, you don't have to give 100% in every session in terms of intensity, but your intent should always be 100%.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Absolutely agreed. So yeah, a lot of it was, for me, basing it around that long, slow distance training, because that was pretty much what was going to form the foundations of my ability to actually do work and give my aerobic system that stimulus. But then I was almost microdosing in high intensity work, but that wasn't every single session either. So I think the biggest mistake I probably made was at the start doing a little bit too much high intensity work. So for me, an entire session would be built up around intervals. Whereas as I started to move into higher, and that was okay at the start because my volumes weren't super high, but as I started to get my volume of actual training up, the amount of high intensity work couldn't keep climbing because I was just like, man, this is
your
hard.
ceiling doesn't go up, therefore your intensity can't.
Yeah. So there's a point, there's a point where it's okay. And then you sort of, as you keep climbing with the volume, the rest of it is just like you start feeling like you're going to hit that wall pretty quick. So I was like, how can I still get in that high amount of training volume I need whilst giving myself enough of that intense training to start pushing my threshold and my VO2 max up more? Because that's ultimately what I need to be successful in a long duration event. So the key, I guess the key driver in the end, what I did use is for an interval session, I would start off. So say a good example is my sessions on the bike. If I had a 75, 90 minute session, my first 15 to 30 minutes on the bike would just be that long, slow duration, heart rate controlled intensity. And then I would have a middle patch where I'm working intensely for say 30, 40 minutes.
Yep.
And my work to rest ratios would up 2, 3 to 1.
Sure.
And then on the back end of that, I would finish it off again with some longer slow distance stuff, just again controlling for heart rate. So that way I'm still hitting that nice little bit of intense work, but I've just got a little bit of extra volume tapped onto this start and finish to give me the work that I need to actually hit the volume necessary.
Yeah, that aerobic work is just money in the bank, and it compounds interest every single time you tick those boxes. It's compounding interest.
Absolutely.
As you say, it increases that buffer between your ceiling and your intensity, your ability to produce effort and that fatigue area. And that's something that is one of the hardest things to teach athletes, is that aerobic work isn't boring. It's just time consuming. It's boring if you let your ego dictate that you have to go and do, 60 minutes of aerobic work. Rather, you should be considering, I am so fortunate that I have 60 minutes to dedicate to increasing my ceiling, even if it's by 1%, because if I do this over 3 weeks and I get 10 of these aerobic sessions in a week that aren't taxing, that I should be able to back up, I can potentially increase my ceiling over 3 weeks by, maybe 30% if I'm just doing those little 1% sessions, whilst still training at an intensity you can recover from more intense sessions. The aerobic system is a very powerful tool that's often overlooked. And I guess if I was going to get another legacy in from my time in the industry, it would be to have people fall in love with the aerobic system, because oxidative phosphorylation is phenomenal. And once you learn how to tap into it from both the oxygen side of things and the carbon dioxide side of things, you can make some serious magic happen with, anyone, chronic pain or non-athletic or athletic populations. You can get some serious gains in a very small amount of time just by manipulating tiny little variables in a low intensity setting, just developing volume and consistency over a short amount of time. So I think it's cool that, you dedicated a lot of time. I mean, it's obvious that you dedicate a lot of time to it, but it's not obvious in the sense of how, we discuss the aerobic system when it comes to the ways that we train and prescribe it, which is, one of the great things that I wanted to talk about today with you. And then that leads me into the next thing that we wanted to talk about, which was the nose breathing that, we discussed all those weeks ago. I'd love to get your take on how you found the nose breathing. That's one of those interesting things that, when we get to the principles of it, people have been using the principles of nose breathing for a really long time, and they've been selling it as a marketable tool, like an oxygen deprivation mask. And it gets a lot of backlash, but I don't quite think that it gets the recognition it deserves either as a training tool and its purpose, and the fact that we've got one attached to our friggin' nose or attached to our face. So yeah, let's dive into the nose breathing a little bit, man. How did you find it? And what were some ways that you sort of implemented it to influence your training?
Yeah, so I pretty much from the start was like, okay, I'm going to do this long, slow distance stuff. I've spoken to Cam about the benefits of nose breathing. I've read a little bit on it myself, so I'm going to actually give this a crack. So I think it was probably the first 4 weeks, I reckon, I really found it difficult to just breathe through my nose, because I hadn't done, at rest, I do it a lot and I'm very conscious of it. But actually during training, it wasn't something I'd done much of. I just let my body sort of do what felt comfortable. But for that first 4 weeks of literally just trying to do nose breathing, it was like, and especially when I was working at higher intensities, I just couldn't do it. But the lower intensities on the bike, I found it really difficult. And I think, I'm not really sure why. I think it must just be because the oxygen demand for your lower body is like so high on the bike, because you're riding through such a bigger range of motion than when you run.
Yeah, it's very repetitive movements through the body.
So I found it probably more difficult on the bike than when I was running aerobically. But as I got just better at it, I just got better at it. And like my body, all of a sudden, I felt like I was in control of like just everything almost. It was really weird. I don't have like a good way to describe that, but I just felt in control, and
I can maybe help you with that description if I may.
Go for it.
You enter a state of flow.
Yep.
And in that state of flow, the way that I explain this to people that works for me is everything that we interact with at a cellular level, right up through to our conscious mind, is an input that we respond or react to. So if it's sensory inputs through the ear, we're hearing it. If it's through the nose, we're smelling it, tasting it, seeing it. When you're in that state of flow and you're responding to stimulus rather than reacting to it, everything seems to slow down because you're able to respond more rapidly to more information, to more inputs. So the inputs that come in don't change. It's just your brain gets better at responding to multiple inputs at once. And you enter this state of flow that is, as you say, very hard to describe until you've been in it, in the flow state. Very hard to describe, but for people that know how to get there, very easy to enter once you start manipulating a few variables. Does that kind of like sort of describe your experience with it?
I agree. That's pretty bang on. And like, I think what I would like to have probably experimented more with next time was almost controlling or even trying to slow my respiratory rate more whilst under stress. So like this time I was just making sure that I was in control of my breath, just nice and easy through my nose. Yeah, consistent. Yeah. Just trying to take nice deep breaths, fill up my diaphragm with air and be in control. But now, like, as I look back, I'm like, wow, I wonder if I could have really just like slowed my breathing even more and just like almost become at one with like everything around me.